Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, all about getting savvy with AMP for email. So we have some great speakers here today to bring you this Q&A. First of all, we have John Harmer, who is the lead product manager, for AMP for email. He has a great background in tech and technology, and he is responsible for the Gmail platform and features like AMP for email. So he is the expert who we will be peppering with questions in just a few moments. I'm Laura Sullivan, VP Creative Director at Brightwave. I look at emails all day from some of our great clients. So very happy to be here and just be a moderator. And last but not least, we have Jake Ansbach, who is our development manager at Brightwave. So he does a lot of thinking about innovation in the inbox and a lot of the topics that are very pertinent to Google AMP. So he's going to be here to kind of bring those questions to John that we have gathered from the community, from our networks, and from the Brightwave community as well. So I first wanted to tell you a little bit about Brightwave and who we are. We were founded in 2003, so we're kind of the oldest and most established email agency. We are a full-service email agency. We do tech, strategy, and creative for ECRM, CRM programs, and we've been called by outside analysts the best of the best, which we're really proud of. We are tech agnostic, so we're well versed in a variety of marketing clouds, and we can kind of drive any car in that regard. We're very proud of our client roster, everyone from Chick-fil-A and Cracker Barrel to United Healthcare and Goldman Sachs. We really work on some outstanding clients. Something unique about Brightwave is that we've been growing for 15 years. We're the only email agency that has been on the Inc. 5000 list for 4 consecutive years in a row. So we're really proud of our standing there. And we're really proud of our thought leadership. So we do webinars like this, we do blog posts. We also do a really awesome conference called EIQ every year, where we bring different kinds of thinking about the email space. And last but not least, we're proud of our people. Everyone at Brightwave is kind of an email expert in a wide variety of disciplines. They're very passionate, and we have great people. So that's a little bit about Brightwave. I'll turn it over to John to talk a little more about AMP for email.
Thanks. Yeah, so AMP for email is a relatively new email standard that we've been working on at Google, along with Microsoft, Yahoo, and Mail.ru. Its goal is to be the future of email, and it adds interactivity and up-to-date information inside of the emails that your users already get. And we'll dive into a lot more detail as we go through. So some of the things it allows you to do is bringing sort of these engaging visual experiences into your emails. More importantly, it allows you to fetch up-to-date information so that the content that the users are looking at is always like up-to-date and relevant. And finally, it allows you to take your users to take action inside of the email so that they can, do whatever the call to action is and go on about their day without having to change context. Sure. So this is an example that we sent out last year around the Google I/O conference, back when we had conferences in person, the good old days. And it's a post-event survey that we made in AMP for email. You can see the little lightning bolt up there on the top right next to the timestamp. And essentially what we've done is a really simple example of baking in a survey into the message. So if you zoom in, you'll see that there's 3 radio buttons for the users to express their sort of initial thoughts. And then once they click on that radio button, they get the next experience. It like automatically just shows up the text box so they can have a little more context to their answer. And then they can immediately hit feedback, send feedback in the button at the bottom, and they've done the entire survey without ever having to leave their email, change context, open a new tab, all that kind of stuff. So ideally, this is increasing your response rates pretty significantly. It did for us. And let your user, so you're gonna have a better idea like what your users actually thought of the conference. It's actually not that complicated to build an AMP for email. So here's some of the content necessary to create that message. You can see the radio button there, the text box, all that stuff. Another simple example, this is comparing an HTML version of an email to an AMP version. the AMP version, you can see when you hit review issue, it accordions out and allows the user to input more content, whatever the thing is that you need to retrieve from them. Take that action right inside the email. And then again, on the right side, you'll see the code. If you're not familiar with code and that this whole black screen of colored text scares you, ignore it. Your email developers will do a great job helping you out with that. But the idea is that it's not that hard to do. And a lot of people have historically associated this with as like a Google thing, but it's actually a consortium. There's a working group that meets every month of these four email client providers. Yahoo is coming very soon. Outlook is already in developer preview. Gmail and Mail.ru also support it fully. And we're happy to work with any other email clients that want to add support for this functionality.
Awesome. We wanted to kind of add a little color too of just, maybe a use case or an example of what's possible. So, we haven't been able to execute fully a Brightwave on an AMP for email example, but we're getting very close. So we've just been doing a lot of exercises and thinking about, what would an awesome experience be? And this is just one example from Chick-fil-A of a catering experience. So let's say someone was on the catering site, they were looking around and then they abandoned the catering page. How can we bring that experience into the inbox and kind of shorten the time for them to take the action, give them some suggested items, and then let them really order directly from the inbox to kind of bring that web experience to them. So this is just an example of a way that we're hoping to execute in the future.
That's really cool.
One day soon. Great. Well, I think that gives everyone at least a level set of, kind of what we're working with. Without further ado, I think we want to just throw in some questions that were sourced from Facebook pages like Women of Email, our LinkedIn community, our Brightwave community, where we kind of thought about what are those questions that people are still, are still lodged in people's minds of like, how do I do this? I really want to do it, but how? So I'll turn it over to Jake to take it from here.
All right, John. So now that we've kind of been dazzled by these examples, what are some of the best ways a marketer can leverage AMP for email in their next campaign?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's three sort of key elements that you can have. There's that visual interactivity, which is things like carousels and accordions, so just literally the flashier visual elements that you can include in the email. There's also things like the workflows, so you can think of that Chick-fil-A ordering thing or an email survey. Progressive profile elaboration is another good one, right? It says you want to learn more about your users. We have some people who've done like loan calculators, so like mini workflows baked inside of an email. And then another one is up to date, keeping the content like up to date. So you can think of things like shipping status, maybe comments on like a ticket or a listing maybe. For like an Airbnb listing, you can have your user comments could come in there and you can respond to them, or like a product listing on an e-commerce site or something like that. Having that latest information whenever the user opens email is actually extremely valuable.
What companies have you seen that utilized AMP well in their campaigns? Yeah,
so that last screen, there was a Pinterest example. They've done a really good job. LendingTree created one of those email loan calculator quiz things to figure out the right kind of a loan for users. You can see the example here on the screen. Baking that in has increased, their conversion rates to having people actually apply for loans. The next one is Google ourselves with the Nest team. This one is just a relatively straightforward, one of the visual elements I was talking about. So it's, in this case, it's an accordion. The left side, you'll see is sort of the HTML version, how it's sort of very long. And this one on the right allows you to sort of expand and get more content as you need it. Here's the Pinterest example that they first launched. So the idea is you get an email full of pins, you see something interesting that you like, and you can just instantly click to save it to one of your boards without having to pop out and make sure that you get the right thing.
Oh, those are really neat. What do you believe are some of the roadblocks preventing marketers from including AMP for email in their next campaign? I know myself, as I read things can get a bit confusing and it's a bit different, something to get used to. What do you think are those roadblocks?
The one that you need to solve for first is whether or not your ESP supports AMP's email type, MIME type. So all that AMP is, I think I left this out at the beginning intro, is just a third MIME type inside of the message, the third content type. So there's already a text part and an HTML part, and anybody who's built an email has probably experienced having to create content for those two. This is just yet a third type, and if your ESP doesn't support it, it usually will just strip it out, and you're going to fail to ever render AMP. The other thing you need to be concerned with is making sure that your audience is on the appropriate clients. I mean, being Gmail, Yahoo, and Outlook.com, that does cover a great deal of the marketplace, but obviously that's not everything. And then back to the black screen with the colored text, like there is some complexity in building these things. Obviously, it's a little bit more complex than just doing an HTML and text email, because you have to also then do the AMP part. And if you're not a coder, an email coder or HTML coder, that can be maybe daunting. There's definitely people that can help you. And then the last one is reporting metrics. So if you think to that, maybe even that lending tree example or the Pinterest example, right? Both of those are going to drive less time on site potentially, because you're taking the action inside of the email instead of going to the website to take action, or the landing page or whatever. And I have some examples later. Some people are familiar with Google Docs commenting emails. Like if that team had measured their success, it allows you to reply to comments inside of an email if you're not familiar, on a doc you're collaborating with people on. If that team had measured their success based on the number of views essentially of the document, they would have thought it was a failure, because people are collaborating and taking action inside of the email, and they don't ever have to actually open the document a significant portion of the time. So it's one of those things where you have to think about what your real metrics are, the metrics that matter, the behaviors you're trying to change. I'll talk about that a little bit later, for your users, and not just some of the leading metrics like maybe clicks or opens or things like that, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a changing of a mindset for your typical analyst. You know, for years we've used click-through and conversion rates for reporting, and now there's a lot more focus, especially with AMP for email, about like, was the action taken? Like seems like the most important thing when utilizing AMP.
Exactly.
How do you communicate this cost-benefit trade of AMP for email versus traditional emails to clients? That seems like a big one.
Yeah, obviously it is slightly more work than the previous, and it depends on the tools you're using as to how much more work it is. There are some companies, obviously, that will help you take that burden of building off your plate. Thanks for hosting me. But then the cost benefit analysis. So there's going to be, I think, 4 or 5 examples from one of our senders, Ecwid here. Just quickly I'll quickly go through the use cases and then talk about why they matter. So this one's like a catalog. You can see the different pictures along the top of the screen for different products. And then within each product, there's sort of a gallery of images to dig into more information. Ecwid is a merchant, an online site for setting up an e-commerce store for people. So that then when you set up that store initially, they send you a confirmation email and make sure you are who you say you are. And you can see here that they've enabled that email confirmation in a single click inside of the email. And then they changed that call to action to be to sign into your control panel. Next time you go to that email, you just have the sign in control panel button, so you don't need to reconfirm. The next case they have here is the order status I was talking about briefly. So like how far along the process is your item that you have ordered? Has it shipped? Is it, in this case, it's still processing? Like having that up-to-date information is super useful for your customers. And then the last one is the abandoned cart email, which is kind of like the Chick-fil-A example earlier, right? Anything somebody left in their cart, you could send them an email that has this very interactive, very visually appealing experience that they can use to finish ordering the stuff that they left behind. And so this is where we actually get into the business case part of this answer. Ecwid merchants that use that abandoned cart email actually saw a 27% increase in sales, like top line revenue from just using that email. So as you dig into whether or not you can afford the additional, minor additional expense of developing email, like if you can pitch that you can give 25%, 27% more sales to your leadership, I think they'd probably say yes.
Very true.
Yes.
There's another example here that it's Oyo. They do travel accommodations kind of recommendations. So this is, again, a nice visual thing for users to go through, and you can see all the extra details of that listing right inside the email, and they can sort of do all that browsing experience from inside their email. And in this experiment that they did, or this campaign that they did, they actually saw, basically around 60% higher click-through rates and higher conversions, 57% if you want to be super precise. And so like the higher click-through rate is kind of interesting. That's kind of a leading indicator for the ultimate success. But to me, the number that really matters is that 60% higher conversion, right? That's what your business is in the business of doing, is converting browsers to buyers. And so that one's pretty impactful. Finally, Indeed, job search website. I'm sure some of us are more familiar with that than others. I've used it quite a bit in my career. They had this is the sort of recommended jobs thing, and they had that top job is sort of dynamically generated based on when you open that email, so that to make sure that that job is still available and is also the most relevant job for you at the moment that you actually open their message. And they, as a result of implementing AMP for email, we saw a flash of it a second ago, they actually had a 2x increase in their clicks. So they're obviously very thrilled with those kinds of results. So yeah, that's the kinds of things you can use, and we'll have more of these case studies. If you go to amp.dev, there's a case, I think the Find Domestic has a case study on amp.dev that talks about their experience. We'll have more of those as we go forward.
All right, now you've kind of touched on a few just now, but do clients typically see a higher return for integrating AMP for email and promotional, transactional, like both types of those campaigns?
Yeah, it's been both. It's really about kind of what does a successful campaign look like to you, your business. Like, it's really hard to make blanket recommendations there. If you have something that's, transactional, then pulling a couple of steps of that transaction process into the message is really, really impactful. But again, if you have, if you're a physical retailer, right, then maybe the promotional kinds of things are better. Another new trend we're seeing is the productivity use cases, I call it. So like this Google Comments, you're collaborating with people on a document, you get an email that they've left a comment, you can reply to that comment, respond, resolve the whole thread, whatever. You don't even have to open the document to get people's questions answered, basically. Being able to take this kind of an action from inside the email really saves your users a ton of time and hassle. The satisfaction survey results for this email in particular are incredibly positive. It's the key though is right to find the simple actions users can take inside an email, like the satisfaction survey example I did at the very beginning, or like moving something in a workflow forward, like an approval or like confirmation, reservation, whatever, or like this, collaborating with people. So by bringing those kinds of interactions in, you can really increase your conversions and more importantly, increase your customer satisfaction because you're saving them time.
Yeah, personally, I use that feature every single day. I love it.
Thanks. We do too.
What design and development process changes do you suggest to make AMP for email more easily integrated into a traditional workflow?
Yeah, great question. So the most important thing is to think of your users first, right? Be outside in your thinking. So how can you help your users stay in the context that they're already in instead of like trying to interrupt them and pull them into your context? If that makes sense?
Yeah.
So like let them take actions that they need to take and just move on. I didn't come to email today to spend an hour trying to solve some problem on an e-commerce site, right? I wanted to do the thing and move on. And we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but always have a solid HTML fallback for users on clients that don't support AMP. And then we have these sort of 6 broader design guidelines. So like first off, don't put flashy elements in the email just because you can. Make sure you're providing value to your users, like more actionable messages, more relevant or up-to-date comments, or in recommendations or information. Like, keep their purpose in mind for their opening of your email. Also, some of this interactivity is relatively new, so make sure you have it discoverable and intuitive. Like, it's similar to the rest of the web, so people will probably pick up on most of it, but don't expect that they always will.
I actually have a question about that because it comes up a lot. Making something just super intuitive and hoping that people will carry that web behavior over is, an arrow that says, click here, what do you recommend? Does it need to be somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you make it feel like the experience that they have on your website, if you make it feel like the experience they have on your app, whatever, like having familiar design paradigms implemented in is probably the most effective way. Having giant blinking text and arrows is probably not the best choice. But like, to the third point here, right? So like similar navigation elements to the way that people expect to have on the web, like, back, close, undo, whatever those kinds of buttons make sense. And then thinking back to that Google Docs comments email example, like communicating back the status of their action, letting them know that the button that they clicked did a thing, or the Ecwid confirmation email, right? You click that button, it does a little loader and then says, hey, you have a new status, right? Or you enter the comment in the Google Docs and it shows you that comment. And that status is then maintained the next time you open the message. I think that's incredibly important. Otherwise, people are going to quadruple submit or whatever.
Sure, that's a good point.
Yeah, and then like keep it relatively simple. You probably don't need to build your entire application of your website in the email, although some versions of that might be kind of cool if you're really creative. So be thoughtful about the kinds of use cases that actually do make sense in an email versus things that are going to require a user to go to your app or your website. And finally, this is incredibly important. Like make sure that you test your emails to ensure that they're accessible for users of screen readers or other accessibility features on both desktop and mobile, right? Not everybody's context is the same as yours, so make sure that it works for everybody that you're sending it to.
Are the best practices or planning features that work well in AMP for email and fallback gracefully in unsupported clients?
Yeah, so there's essentially a requirement that you have an HTML fallback. I showed that HTML fallback on the Nest example, sorry. So you have to have the HTML part and the AMP part. And you want to try to keep the interactions as similar as possible, or some similar levels of content in there, even if it means perhaps they need to pop a new tab on the HTML fallback version and complete their action, like on a survey or a form fill. So you'll see this is a carousel on the right, and then the long scrolling version of that same content on the left. The content, especially for things like searching through your email client to find it, like if you had vastly different contents, or if the HTML fallback was like, please upgrade your email client or some other, ridiculous, like no value thing, that wouldn't help your users whatsoever. So make sure you have a really strong HTML version as well as the AMP version, especially in these early days.
I'm curious to know about that. Are you seeing people create an AMP version, another version, and then a fallback to that? Like, are you seeing cascading fallbacks, or really can you get by with just two versions?
I'm pretty sure you can get by with just two versions. If you were being really clever and you wanted to create, the HTML, interactive HTML kinds of things that are available, you could do that as your fallback, and then have that have a fallback as well. That's starting to get really complicated and starts to feel like Inception to me. But if that's like, if there's value to you doing that, by all means you can do that. Sure. Make sure that you stay within the email size limits and all those kinds of things that'll happen, right? That's the other issue you'll have. So.
All right, this is a big topic that we got from a lot of users. How does the AMP for email registration process work?
Great question, and incredibly important. So there's sort of 3 steps. You want to make sure that you meet all of the various guidelines that we have for sending AMP. And we'll go through what those are here momentarily. And then you send whatever the email clients that you want to be, let's call it whitelisted. You want to send AMP emails to, you need to send them a production ready email and fill out their registration form. The links in these docs are to Google's registration process, and we are working with the other email senders to try to unify and consolidate that whole process. So that you only have to register once, but for the moment you have to register for each client you want to send emails to. So in terms of the guidelines, we want to make sure that you have a real production quality email that you're sending us, not some demo or hello world kind of example. We want something as close to the thing that you're going to send as possible. And then we want to make sure that you have this, as I mentioned before, the similar HTML and text MIME parts, fallbacks. Again, there's many instances, not just unsupported clients. Users can choose to disable dynamic email inside of their client. So there's that. there could be connectivity issues or whatever when they open the message, right? There's many reasons that an email could fall back to the HTML part, so you want to make sure that you have a good one. This one seems like it should go without saying, but like the email you send should have no bugs. If it has bugs, we will find them, some version of them, and send it back to you and say, please try again. And then in terms of security, like we make sure that your emails, your sending addresses all pass SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. This is important to make sure that people are good actors in the ecosystem and not doing things that we don't want them to do to users. So we have AMP for email best practices online, and you want to make sure that your email conforms to all the suggestions there. It's relatively straightforward. It shouldn't be too terribly difficult. And this one gets a lot of people. So the registration process is on a per sending email address basis, like a from address basis. So it's not like we would whitelist all of brightwave.com or all of google.com. It's, you know, marketing at google.com or whatever the from address is going to be. And so for the time being, at least, each sender needs to register separately with a separate production quality email.
Can it be the same production quality email, or should we really try to diverse the two?
It should be diverse.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had some people try to submit the same email claiming it was for 4 or 5 different clients, and what it ends up feeling like is that they're just a spammer getting ready to gear up some bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So just like my assumption is if you have a different from address, it's because you're sending different content to a different audience. So we don't allow users or the general public to directly author and send these emails. You can have user-generated content in the message because of posts and comments, like the Google Docs comments things. Like an individual user can't reply or craft an AMP email from their Gmail account or from their Yahoo account, for example, right? It has to come from basically an email marketing tool or a mass sending tool of some sort. So the testing tools and email playgrounds that we have aren't going to be whitelisted per se. And what you do there is there's a series of steps on how to test your AMP emails in Gmail or in the other clients on their pages that allow you to figure out how to test and see what the things are going to look like ahead of time. And then with all emails, bulk sending emails with Gmail and all the other clients, you have to follow our individual bulk sender guidelines. Be kind to our users. We value them. Hopefully you do too.
Yeah. Don't send bad email. Sure.
Yeah. Don't send bad emails. And then we need a consistent history of sending a decent volume of email from the domain, like 100 emails per day for a few weeks. These numbers vary. There's not a sort of deterministic thing. It's all part of some magic Google stuff in the background. We're just trying to avoid people to fire up a one-off. And then don't be a jerk on that last one.
Last one is don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
Which we've said. Were there any other questions on your mind, Jake, or anything else that we didn't get to ask? This was a lot of just great information, but anything else lingering from just what you've collected?
No, I honestly, I pushed my questions in there as well. So
good. Well, this has been super informative. I know that our audience and our community will benefit a lot from just getting this clear info straight from you. So thank you. I think the conclusion that I reach is, as we get more and more support, it sort of feels like we're at a tipping point for developing and designing and bringing these AMP for email campaigns to life. So it's very exciting. I think, we got to identify the right types of campaigns. That's what I got from what you said. Like, how can we find the right emails to invest in and experiment with? And then how can we really think about the best practices that you just mentioned for sending, also the design and development best practices, and think through those fallbacks. So those are the big things that I take away from this. And I think we're really excited to get out there and make things happen. So
yeah, back to that first point real quick. I don't think I emphasized this enough or at all during the webinar. There's a list you can see at amp.dev of the ESPs that currently offer support in, I think, the FAQs under email. But like the way that a lot of those companies ended up enabling support was senders like your audience asking them to do so. They had a campaign or they wanted to do something in AMP, and they said, please, would you enable the AMP parts in our emails? And that's the kind of thing that spurs those ESPs to action. without demand from their paying users, right? They have no reason to prioritize the work to implement this. So by all means, ask your ESP. I feel like the cable company, ask your cable company to load HBO. Ask your ESP to support AMP. And obviously that will make more ESP support AMP, and importantly, the one that you're using. So
that's a great point. So don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel who's asking
we
for
need
it.
them. Yeah.
Got it. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us for this session. It was highly informative, and we look forward to bringing you more content later. Thank you all.